name is Seth. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Dr. Beth Logan. Beth Logan has a PhD and is a seasoned professional with extensive experience in data science and voice technology. She currently serves as the Vice President of Data Science and Voice at Roku since November 2019. And prior to this, Beth held various leadership positions at, I don't know how to say that, dataxu from March 2009? dataxu. It's okay. So she served as the Chief Data Scientist, where a robust data science strategy was developed and implemented along with optimization initiatives to enhance corporate performance. And earlier career experiences included a senior research engineer role at Intel Digital Health and research positions at Hewlett Packard and Compaq, focusing on machine learning, data analysis, and speech recognition. And she has a PhD from the University of Cambridge, UK, and dual degrees in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of Queensland, Australia. So I'm really excited to have you here. My advisor is actually from Australia, so it's great to know someone who has a bit of background from there. But I can't say just how much I'm excited to talk to you today, Beth, especially with your research in voice and whatnot. So my first question kind of relates to that. And I'm really interested to know kind of what prompted your transition from academia to industry. So we have lots of students here who are kind of considering their life choices, whether they should go on to graduate school, whether they should go into a PhD program. And for you, as you're kind of pursuing your degree, did you kind of always envision yourself kind of making a move to industry, or what sort of prompted that?
So I came from Australia, right? Mm-hmm. So as soon as I finished my undergrad, I was like, yeah, I'm going to get a job. And I got a job. And then I sort of looked around and I realized that all the smart people were doing PhDs. And my job was pretty interesting, but within probably a year and a half, they were already saying, hey, you can be a manager, because they thought I'd be a good manager. Turned out I was, but that was like much later in my life. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. So I was like, oh, I'll just start applying for PhDs. But I thought my plan was to become an academic, right? But as soon as I left Australia, I realized, oh, wow, there's way more out there. And especially when I got to the UK, I started my PhD, and then I realized where everything was really happening, in my field at least, was in the US. Even though I was in a very good speech lab in the UK, the US was just like, that's where it was all happening. This is like before 2000, right? The late 90s. And what really got me going to the US and sort of getting into industry was I got this not invitation, but this internship advertisement arrived in my inbox, and some for the US, right? And so some other people from my lab in previous years had gone to the US. I'm like, I'm going to do that. So I go over, I'm like, wow, it's like so different here. It's like, this is where I should be, So until that point in my PhD, I was kind of floundering. I didn't exactly know what I was going to do after my PhD, but it's after that internship, I was like, I'm going to move to Boston, and because that was actually the center of speech recognition at the time. It's like, that's where I'm going to be. I'm going to just go there, do that. So I guess I didn't really have a plan, but these things work out, I guess, for the best. So I think I just sort of stayed true to my heart, which was really impact. And so I felt at the time, academia, you won't have impact, go into industry. There's actually a place in industry for me that's not just, ringing up suppliers and things like that, which is kind of what I was doing at the job in Australia, which actually that was pretty cutting edge for Australia at the time, but it wasn't, you couldn't really do a lot of research. But in the US, you could do research and be in industry at the same time. And I thought that was great. So that's how I ended up in industry, and I guess I'm still here.
Okay, great. I think that kind of leads into my second question, which is about how does your research and the things that you did in your PhD program kind of continue to affect you today? So I noticed that you kind of did some data science stuff, you did some machine learning stuff, but now you're back to doing voice things, which, as someone who also went through PhD, feels kind of gratifying to really see that transition. So has your past research sort of affected the types of opportunities that you pursued over the course of your career?
Yeah, so my PhD was in something called speech enhancement, which is speech recognition and audio processing. So when I finished my PhD, my plan was to like change the world with new speech recognition, but I kind of got slightly bored with speech recognition, because when I got to the US, I was in this lab that there were people from many disciplines. And one thing I had picked up along the way in my PhD was machine learning, which actually was a kind of new name for an old field at the time. So I started doing more machine learning, and then I started applying things I knew in speech to other fields. And actually, one thing I did take away from a PhD, a very big thing, was being an experimentalist and working with big data. Because at the time, there wasn't a lot of fields that did really big data. Like even vision, they were all doing kind of small problems because they didn't have labeled data sets. But speech had really big labeled data sets, and computational biology had that, and some physics fields had that. We were all used to working with clusters and big data. So that, I think, is a theme that kind of went through my work in many ways. But I definitely tried a lot of different fields until I landed on advertising, which I guess I worked in for about 10 or 12 years, probably still working today, actually. Though it's kind of a more minor part of what I do. But advertising had a lot of labeled data and had a lot of data. But at the time, the digital advertising was just starting. So there's a lot of opportunity to try new algorithms. I guess that's another theme of my work that I like. I don't like working in a field that's really established. I like sort of working at a time when it's starting, and because you can make a lot more progress. You know, you can. Someone told me this. You can do research with like a shovel instead of a teaspoon. So I guess another thing with industry that's fun is you don't have to publish a paper about it if you don't want to. Like it's just you make the thing work and put it out there and see what happens with real people. Um, but I think the things I took from my PhD were, you know, of course, the machine learning, the stats and all that, but also the experimental nature, which, you know, that's a sort of, it's called lean analytics now, but that didn't really exist. Like some people were doing that, and lots of those people went to Google and other places. And that kind of started machine learning in a big way when more data became available and it was possible to label that data.
Okay, I think that also kind of leads into my next question about data science. So, kind of as you're describing, machine learning, data science, data analytics are kind of new terms for stuff that was sort of happening before. But in your case, have you actually seen kind of a change in the industry of, say, the types of skills that people have or their expectations of work as a result of these kind of shifting definitions of what people call certain kinds of work?
Yeah, so when I started working at dataxu, there was no such word, like data science didn't really exist. In fact, I looked up just this morning that Harvard article, that the sexiest job data science article. It's actually from 2012, but I started working there 2009, I think, or maybe 2010. Actually my title was some weird thing like analyst, machine learning engineer, or something weird like that. So I was basically a machine learning engineer, but then there was a lot of business aspects to it that you had to talk to sales, and because the customer for advertising is the actual ad company, it's not the consumer. So at Roku, I work for we do have ad clients as well, but also I do a lot of work with consumers, and you can sort of guess a bit more what consumers might do. But when the customer is like a sort of specialist in another area, you can't really guess. You have to sort of use data and of course, data is better anyway. But so we were like doing that. We were like, okay, let's try this, see what the customers do. And like, oh, the customer didn't do what we thought because they're like recent college grads. They're not like people with PhDs who are the people writing the code. So then we had to sort of collect more data and do more iterations. So that's what I said, like the lean analytics approach. That book didn't exist either. That book came out 2013 or something, right? So all that stuff happened after we already built the product. um, but anyway, I think the thing is just following the data. And then later that article came out and everyone wanted to be a data scientist. And we thought the classic data scientist, and I still think that in some ways, is someone who's good at stats, someone who's good at business, and someone who can write code pretty well, but doesn't have to be as good as an ML engineer. But then, also they're analysts, right, who definitely stronger on business, and sometimes they want to be called data scientists, and that's okay, I guess. But I think the role has morphed a bit. Like I think when that article was written, it was more of an ML engineer who knew business, and now it's more of an analyst who can write code, I think.
Okay. It also sounds like you kind of had this process of continuing to learn and kind of had an eye on research and stuff while you were still kind of working. How do you kind of stay on top of things? This is one of the questions we ask guests all the time because, partially this interview series is really about how do you become a good professional, right? And kind of keep up with the different kinds of techniques and things like that.
I think you just follow your interests if as much as you can. I mean, you have to still have a job. But actually, before I worked at dataxu, I looked at like because my company it was the recession, right? So I had a job, but then my company's like, no, I'm going to close. They're going to close the Boston lab, and you can move to California on our dime if you want. And I was like, oh, I don't really want to do that. So I started looking around a lot of places, and there were a lot of at the time, surprisingly, a lot of startups doing really interesting things. But some of them were like, oh, I don't really care about that problem. And some of them were the people, I was like, oh, I don't know if I can work with these people. But then, when I landed at data, I was like, wow, this problem is pretty interesting because my boyfriend, now husband at the time, was actually working in marketing. So I knew a little bit about it. And then they were using like clusters and can you use clusters? I'm like, yeah, sure, I can use clusters. And I like the people. So I think that you have to like the people you work with, but you have to like the problem that you're working on as well. So that sort of helps guide your career a bit. But, although when you say my career, it sounds like, oh, I had this great plan to do all these things. I think me and probably lots of other people, that's not exactly how it worked out. You just follow, but you would be more successful if you follow your interests and something you're passionate about. Otherwise, you probably lose interest and not do as well. So you have to sort of be true to your heart, I guess.
Okay. I think that's great. So one of the other questions I have is kind of about technical roles versus leadership roles. So I know that you've kind of worked as a manager, you've also worked as a VP, and I kind of want to know a little bit about how these roles differ and what led you personally to take on more leadership roles. This kind of series is called AI for Leaders, so there's kind of this idea that people might kind of move on into higher up managerial roles at some point, but kind of what are the differences between these different types of roles?
Okay, so management is extremely different to being an IC. So what you see as an IC, what your manager does, is probably the tip of the iceberg of what they actually do. I mean, it's very, very good if managers are technical for a technical leader, because they can push back on bad ideas and they can kind of help you when you get stuck. Because lots of things they've seen before, maybe slightly different, but they can at least guide you, say, hey, did you look at that thing? Did you look at that thing? Or you use some model and you're like, yeah, that's really not going to work because of that. I've seen that fail. You can try it, but I would maybe not advise that. But the higher up the food chain you go in management, the less you can, in fact, you should not be technical, I think. Not too technical. You can certainly keep up to date, read stuff, try, you can play with things on the weekend or whatever. But management is like a discipline. You really have to study it to be good at it. Like that may not be obvious, but you have to, read books, talk to people, get mentors, go to courses, do everything you can, like read Harvard Business Review articles and things like that. Because and also see lots of different things. Like there's lots of parts of management that are especially to do with like the HR side of management that it's something you've seen before, or someone that's been through that before, what the best way is to handle it. But the good things, I always find that not the best parts of management, but the better things in management are like, strategy, increasing productivity or hiring good people, figuring out org structures. And also there's a lot of sideways management, managing stakeholders, which actually ICs should do as well. But managers have to sort of do it on behalf of their team, make sure their team is, looked after and not swept under the rug, and that their work gets seen and things like that. So I really like the sort of coaching and strategy part of being a VP, and like, encouraging people to learn and helping spread the word of, technology and stuff. Definitely have a lot of not so favorite parts. And so I think you also asked how I got into it, right? So I had been in IC. I think there's no hurry to get into management, by the way. Like lots of people under me are always like, oh, can I be a manager? I'm like, really? Go try doing this for a while. Like I sort of give them homework. Like go read this book and see if you still want to be a manager. There's no hurry, really. You've got lots of career to, like, if you want to be a manager, if you don't think you're very good IC, like a good technical person, maybe you should be a manager. But I think not everyone, there's nothing wrong with being an IC, actually. I think that's in many ways, you probably have a lot less stress in your life, and you'll actually have more satisfaction like building things. But if that's not exactly your thing, you can certainly try management. But again, there's no hurry to it.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like, I hate to say it, but on social media, technical people love to pick on managers for not quite knowing what you're doing. But it sounds like you developed a real respect for managerial work and the kinds of challenges that it has.
Yeah, it's at Roku. Actually, people tend to have it. Like people tend to not just manage a couple of people. Like when you're only managing, when you start, it's best to only manage a few people, and you'll find you can still be technical, especially if it's like many people like me get promoted to lead a team they were already working in, so they already know a lot of the technical stuff about that team. But when you take over a team that you didn't start in a different company, right? You can't, it's really hard to be very technical in that field. Like you might have like me taking over voice at Roku. I know a fair bit about voice. I know a lot about machine learning. I know a lot about code, but I can't get into the real details of how do I set that config for that thing, which I could maybe in advertising at dataxu still, because I was involved with the code from a very early time. So you really, your job is really not to do that anyway. Your job is to make sure the right people are working on the code and the code is good quality and, it doesn't break and the new products come out and the right products come out, things like that.
Okay. My next question is about a little bit about your experience kind of getting more involved in the business side of companies like Roku. So for our students, but also for engineers and data scientists more generally, do you think that they should really think about the business side of what they're working on? Or is it something that, maybe they should just work on, making sure it just works sort of thing? Like, what's your kind of perspective on that?
You should definitely understand why you're building what you're building. I think especially one of the roles of data science is to present data to the business side of the company. So those kind of data scientists have to know a lot about the business, like why this analysis is being done, what impact it could have. Like you don't want to make mistakes too, obviously, but you want to know what's the how high stakes is this? Like how accurate does it have to be? How confident do we have to be to show this? Just like sometimes people on my data science team are doing analysis and I'm like, you can't show that yet because not all of you have agreed on the analysis method. And so we can't show that higher up because people are going to have questions. They're going to, like people higher up, they want to see something that's polished. But then if you're showing it to some other group, maybe it's okay, it's not polished. They can discuss the technique or something, right? And when it comes to building products in my engineering team, we make sure that they know why we're doing that. Like we explain the roadmap and like these are the benefits of these products because there'll be trade-offs that you have to make when you're building that product. And the engineers should be the ones making the trade-offs, not necessarily me, because they know the code. Like I said, they know the code much better than me. But there's a cost trade-off to doing it a certain way or whatever, right? Or it's going to take 3 times longer, but it's going to be easier to maintain. Maybe that's the right way to do it, right? And if they know the business reasons for doing the thing, making that product, that'll be an easier trade-off for everybody. Sometimes sometimes you might not agree with the product as an engineer and you have to, it's called disagree and commit, but you shouldn't commit to something they think's really stupid, right? You should definitely push back on it.
Okay, that's probably a good idea. You probably shouldn't, get behind something that if you're not really for it. So
but actually, that's what your manager is for. You can push back, like you can push back, but personally, you can go up the chain. You can say, "Hey, I don't think we should be doing this," and then the managers can talk about it, right? Like that's kind of partly what your manager's for.
Okay, that's great. So the last question I kind of have in this first half is about good hires. So we have lots of students who might be making a transition into data science or who are trying to kind of amplify their skills in one way or another. So for you, what kind of skills are you looking for in new hires? And what kind of stands out for you as qualities that might make for a good team member?
So for me, they have to, I always want to hire people that want to have impact because I work in industry, right? So we don't want people getting too researchy. And this probably, when I'm hiring an engineer, it's usually not a big deal. But data scientists, sometimes they have PhDs, so sometimes they tell me, "Oh, I love the data," and then I think that's great. But what do you want to do with the data? Like, do you just want to look at it and make pictures, or do you want to actually use the data to, inform the business or build a product, right? So I think people have to sort of be enthusiastic about doing that. They have to be enthusiastic about the company as well. Like I said, like you're not going to be successful if you're working in some industry you don't really care about. I mean, I think it'd be hard to be successful. Maybe you can do it, but I don't think I would be, right? You have to be, enthusiastic about what you're doing. I think it'll go better. So then obviously people like table stakes, they have to have good technical skills and good communication skills. I mean, and definitely different people in the team might have different, grade of those skills. And you can sort of put people together. Like you can put a really technical person, someone who's really good at stats, you can put with a sort of big picture kind of person. And those two, if you do that, that will probably go better for the team. Oh, I guess one final thing, there can't be, like, this thing is Silicon Valley, can't hire jerks, right? Like people who don't want to help others and they just out there they might be brilliant, but they might also poison the team, right? Because they might be rude or, people are intimidated by them. They can't present their work because the jerk just, rightly points out faults with it, but they do it in a mean way. Like it's okay to point out things that are maybe wrong, but you have to be nice about it, right? Otherwise, no one will feel good about presenting their work, and only that other person will get anything done because everyone else will sort of be scared and probably quit. So that's important too, I guess. Did I cover
Okay,
everything?
so it sounds like there should be a pretty good match between, say, an individual's interest in the company, right? So like they kind of want to meet each other at some level of that's going to kind of propel them through the work, especially when it's difficult. But
Yeah.
also that this teamwork component, which is something we're kind of emphasizing within this program, is a real thing, right? Like how well you can get along with your colleagues, how well you can support them. Because I'm assuming people kind of have different strengths and weaknesses, right? So they're going to kind of have to help each other in different areas and kind of brainstorm and things like that. Is that kind of what you've seen?
Yeah, and in fact, I'm always arguing and I don't have to argue too hard to my higher ups that my team is stronger as a team because actually the data scientists work in different parts of the company, but they're still a team and they meet regularly and they have their own Slack channel and they help. And some of them sit together in different offices. They don't all sit in the same office, but they sit close to others, right? And if one person gets stuck, another person can help them, or another person can check the analysis. Well, it definitely like if one person is assigned to work on one area, you get more than that person because you sort of get some interest from the other data scientist contributing to that person's work and someone they can bounce ideas off. So I think that's very, very important that a team like each other enough to do that, or respect each other, I guess is the right word.
What direction that your team and the other business teams work in when initiating engagement? So, for example, do the data science team point out problems to the business side of things that they might not be aware of and reach out to them proactively to solve potential issues? Or does the business team kind of reach back out to you with their own identified problems, and then your team kind of filters and does assessments on what to take on? And then he kind of has a point at the end about whether there's kind of a top-down or bottom-up approach to these sort of like the business side and the data science side kind of communicating with each other.
So it depends. Some of the more senior data scientists are very proactive about, yeah, and they have really good ideas too, of course. They're very aware of different parts of the business, and they're like, you know what, there's this problem here. I know the answer to that. So that's one way work comes in. I mean, most work at Roku is planned, right? So even for data science work, it's like we're going to work on this research problem for a quarter or half a quarter or whatever it is, right? So sometimes the problems come from the business, especially on the advertising side, because they're more in touch with the customer who, like I said, they're sort of not us, they're not consumers, the customer, they're people who work at ad agencies. So they're more, they think, the problems they face are not something the everyday person might know, right? But the data scientists can still see sub problems, like in the auctions, for example. They're like, these auctions could be better. Why don't we do this? And then propose it. And the business people and ads are very technical typically, and they'll get it pretty quickly. Like, oh yeah, that would be a good idea. Why don't we do that? But we also want to involve engineers, because one unique thing about the data scientists in my team is they don't write production code. So we always have to have engineers involved who are going to take the algorithm or whatever and own it. So the data scientists tend to work on the more researchy stuff that actually might fail, because we don't want to assign an engineer to it, because they could make all this beautiful code and don't actually do the thing we want. So the data scientists kind of work with them to run an experiment or get some code in place, but maybe not the final code, to see if it'll work. And then if it works, then great, the engineers can take it and run with it. But so I think the answer to your question is data scientists, especially senior ones, can propose things to the business. In fact, at Roku, anyone can propose anything. Some data scientists have proposed things not even in their area. We have lots of hackathons and things like that. So sometimes they propose things, they hack it together, they show a sort of new use of machine learning, and sometimes another team takes it in another part of the company and makes a product out of it and sees how it does. So that's a really good. I think it's always good to be proactive as a data scientist anyway, and then good communication with the business. So that's why communication is a very important skill that I look for. I don't want people just sitting in the corner doing their research or making their code. You have to actually be able to sell it. But sometimes another person in the team can help sell it if that person isn't that strong at selling.
Beth, do you think that most businesses today, especially more technical ones, kind of have a research side that they're kind of investing in, like a little bit of experimentation and just trying to see what's going to be helpful, even if they're not quite sure if it'll lead to, I don't know, direct business benefits like immediately?
Yeah, to some degree, definitely. Especially like today, because of Gen AI, there's a lot of exploration in that side, because it's not 100% clear where that's going to be used, because it's really, really cool, but it has problems with hallucinations or you have to put guardrails around it to make it really useful. So everyone's exploring that, I'm sure, in many businesses, not just Roku. But just generally, I think because business is always changing, there's always a new place to try and use machine learning or data analysis or something to find a place where you have the edge or a new pocket of customers that are worth, leaning into and giving some new product. But I think generally the bigger decisions come from, higher up than me. But there's always, we do have a lot of hackathons and things to try and see what ideas come from other places too. And quite a few of those things end up being in the product.
Kind of how has AI and I think especially like the craze around LLMs kind of affected Roku? Is it something that people have been quick to embrace? Have they been skeptical of the kind of the new stuff that's coming out? Like, what's been going on there?
Well, I work for a Californian company, so there's a lot of embracing of it, I have to say. There's certainly a lot of discussion about it. And lots of teams are trying it. It's one of these things that have a bit of free reign to try, because it's one of these things that no one 100% know. Like I said, no one knows how much it's going to be useful. Actually the costs have come down a lot. When it came out, it was pretty expensive, but there's a lot of open source models, because that was kind of a caution from management, like, oh, you can try it, but don't spend too much money. But now even ChatGPT is a lot cheaper, and people have been trying for coding and in the product in other places. We'll see. I think it'll definitely have impact. I think we're still at the well, I remember when search engines first came out, there actually lots of them were really bad, and you had to store a lot of bookmarks to make them useful, because it took you a long time to get to the thing you were trying to find. But then Google kind of had some breakthroughs, and everyone sort of went in that path. And then it was like, oh, this actually works. I don't need to store all those bookmarks anymore. I can just find everything I want. And then it sort of really took off. And I think we might still be at the bookmark stage, where it kind of works, but it can do pretty strange things sometimes. And it's not just, there's also images and other things, not just text, but I spend a lot of time with text. So mostly I look at that. But it's definitely, yeah, I don't know. I think it will be a big change. Like at first, I was a little bit skeptical. I'm a skeptical person, but I was like, no, this is actually, this is the way it was for several other trends I've seen, and we're just at the early stage of it.
So what challenges and opportunities do you see in integrating voice tech with data science to create more personalized user experiences?
I don't know if there's that many challenges. I mean, actually, I keep the teams fairly separate. I don't keep them, but it just works out that way because one's a production team and one's more of a research team. Um, so, I mean, voice, we have a roadmap, we have a PM. And one thing about voice actually is it's like sort of an assistant to the TV. It's not meant to be something you ask general questions to, which actually the team is not very big that supports it. So I think we're not like Alexa or Google where they have huge engineering teams supporting general conversation. We don't need general conversation on the TV. If you want that, I guess you can go to Alexa, but we want to, talking about entertainment is kosher, how to use the TV, that's kosher. Um, the settings on the TV or, one thing you can ask the time, right? But that's on the TV too, right? So I think keeping that constrained and allows us to innovate in that place and make it really slick and useful for the user because it's meant to be more of a companion to the TV than the reason you turn on the TV. You turn on the TV to watch content. You don't turn it on to talk to it, hopefully. Then the voice makes it easier, especially the hands-free aspect. Like if you're on the other side of the room and you want to turn on the TV and put on some sports game or something, you can do that with voice, right? But you're not gonna have a general conversation with it, probably. And I think that's a clever decision by the founder of the company to just keep it constrained. It makes it easier for a small team to support it.
Yeah, and I think that's an important decision too, right? That you don't kind of just spiral out of control and have more and more people working on a part of the technology that's maybe not really that relevant to what your company is doing in particular.
Right, it's not the place we make the most money from the voice. I mean, it's really nice to have, and maybe even table stakes now to have voice remotes because some people want to do that, but not everyone wants to do that. Some people just want to use their phone or just want to use the regular remote.
So Beth, I think that I have a question then about kind of the size of a company, which you just mentioned, right? So there can be a really big difference between, say Roku and Intel as a result of how their departments are structured and things like that. So is that something that our students should be thinking about as they're kind of looking at different roles? We've kind of mentioned this match between interest and things like that, but it seems like size can also definitely influence, say, company culture and other things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the first company I worked at in Australia was less than 100 people. And dataxu, I went all the way from 10 people to, I don't know, 200 and something. So at these smaller companies, it's a double-edged sword, right? You'll grow a lot faster because you have to do everything. You have to, everyone who's there has to, all hands on deck sometimes for all kinds of things. But you'll grow because you'll have to take on different roles very quickly. Like that's how I became a manager. They needed managers. I was there. It looked like I'd be a good manager. That's how I became a manager. And took it from there. At larger companies, even Roku is thousands of people. You can have not as much. There's more stability in some ways because it's a bigger company and you have proper HR and proper healthcare and things like that. But they're not as big an opportunity to grow. Roku's kind of medium, like not that big, so there's still a lot of opportunities. But a bigger company, like 100,000 people or something, it's going to be a lot more process. You just need that. And there could be pockets in that company where you can do really cool stuff. And so it still could be good to go there. And it definitely would probably be more stable, which could be important if you're trying to get a green card or something. Like for me, it was good for me to be at a big company, getting my green card and everything versus a startup, which might have been a roller coaster, very, very, I might not have survived, right? And I had to go back to Australia. But so these are all trade-offs and different you'll have different parts of your times in your career where it makes sense to be at a small company or a large company, right? Just because of stuff going on in your personal life or where your career is and things like that. So it's not necessarily bad or good, but it's just different trade-offs. But again, if you follow your interests, you probably land at a place that makes sense.
All right, it looks like we've gotten a couple questions really wanting to know about voice technology and kind of its integration into different products. Do you think that these products are going to become more popular, or voice services are going to be more integrated into different kinds of things? What do you kind of see as sort of the future of that sort of stuff?
My voice is definitely got a lot better. Like, one of the reasons I think it's so popular is because of sci-fi, but it always works perfectly in sci-fi, or nearly always, right? Whereas, when I was doing speech recognition 30 years ago, it was good for indexing. It wasn't really good. It was okay for dictation. Like, it's sort of okay for some use cases, but until I started using neural nets, which was, maybe 15 years ago, I don't know. Well, seriously using like deep learning. So that, because they had used neural nets before, but it didn't work. Actually didn't work as well as HMMs half the time. So, but when they had the big breakthroughs, now it's actually way, way, way more accurate. Still not 100% accurate because it's hard, right? I don't know if full accuracy is needed, but there's definitely more applications. The more accurate it is, the more applications it's useful for. Like in the car, it's very useful. Whenever you're in a hands-free situation, it's very useful. I feel whenever you're searching, like that's why I think on the TV it's useful for searching for content, because you can use a keyboard, but it's painful. It's just definitely easier not to do that. But I think you could use it for general conversation, but you have to have a reason for doing that. So maybe that's why some of these Alexas and Google are not as useful, because kids might want to talk to it for hours, but adults probably want to do something else. So they just use it for cooking and, the time and the weather and the traffic and things like that, which you could look up, but it is more convenient to use it hands-free if it doesn't make mistakes, which it usually doesn't. So now it's at a state where it's working well.
What kind of steps do you take when you're introducing a new product into the market? And how do you kind of know as a data scientist that you're making the right decisions about, what you're introducing, what you're doing, and other things like that?
Well, it's actually not my job to introduce new products to the market. I wish. But, some ideas have come out on my team. So one thing we do, like, definitely you have to have a good, this is more like startup stuff, right? Like, have a good pitch and try and get advocates for it within the company. Or, if you were having a startup, you'd get VC advocates, I suppose, or at least enough out there to try it with real consumers. I think so. You have to have an advocate who will push it to a place where you can gather data about whether people actually like that product. So it has to sort of be slick enough to interest the people who might use it. But there's a bit of a leap of faith, right? Like no one really knows. So you really have to have a convincing argument. You're not going to be able to do it before you start. I think, you could have a creative idea, you put it out there, but some business person in the company is going to have to take a flyer on, they think that's a good idea, and it will interest consumers. And there's been lots of changes in Roku's UX that have happened that way, not always to do the data science, but some UX person has said, I think we should change this. And so they'll change it, which is some work usually, and then put it out there, do an A/B test. It's like, okay, people are using this, or no one's using that, or it's worse for the company to have that. We'll just can that. And yeah, that's fine, I think. But I mean, this is for all in software. It's a lot harder if you're doing some change, like you're building some airplane or something, right? A flying car or something weird like that. It's a lot of work to get to the MVP. And then, if the market is really there.
Thank you so much, Beth. I really appreciate all your insights today. It was great talking to you.
That was fun. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.